So during this presentation, I will talk to you about GssResource. So my name is Julien. I'm a software engineer at ArcBees. The agenda of today, first I will explain what is GssResource for people that doesn't know anything about it, and why we decide to develop it. Then a few slides on how to use it if you want to use it now in your application. Then I will quickly list all the features provided by GssResource. I will talk also about how to migrate your application from GssResource to GssResource, and then I will finish by talking about the future of GssResource. Hello, what is GssResource? In fact, we can simply say that GssResource is the integration of Google Cursor Stylesheet into grids. And like GssResource, GssResource is a new resource that will help you to write and maintain your CSS in your grid application. To sum up, you will write a GSS file, and the compiler will transform that in an optimized CSS file. So GssResource is the integration of Google Cursor Stylesheet into grid, but what is GSS? So a GSS, so Google Cursor Stylesheet, is a CSS extension that provide missing feature to CSS. So you will the GSS will provide interesting feature like mixin, variable, function, and is also open source and supported by Google. The next question would be, why to do that? Why do you need of GssResource in grid? There are two important reasons to do that. The first one is GssResource is more powerful than the existing CSS resource because it provides some interesting feature that doesn't exist in CSSResource. And this additional feature will allow you to respect the dry principle, so the don't repeat yourself. If you have a big application and we use CSS to do the layout without any CSS extension, it will quickly become a mess, and you will repeat a lot of things everywhere. And with GssResource, your CSS will be cleaner and become easier to write and to maintain. And the second reason is that GssResource bring a full CSS3 support into grids. This is something that are requested for a while by all the grid developers. Yeah, and by a full CSS3 support, that means that you can use media queries, you can use animation keyframe, you can use all the CSS3 selectors that are not supported by GssResource right now. You can use, for example, the new calc method. It's the method in CSS to do computation. And in fact, you can now forget the literal function. In CSSResource, you have the literal function to escape CSS that CSSResource doesn't understand. Now you can forget this method. It doesn't exist anymore. Now, I will show you the feature of GssResource in a few minutes. But let's say that you trust me and you find the library very awesome and you want to use it in your application. The first thing to do, as for the time being, is an external library. You need to install the jar file. So you have two possibilities. First, you can use Maven to do that, or you can install the file manually. If you use Maven, it's very straightforward. You just have to add the dependency of GssResource. And you have also to add the GssResource.jar is deployed on the Sonatype snapshot repository, so you have to add the repository in your Maven configuration. Now, if you want to install it manually, in fact, we have to install to download it and to add 3 jar files in your class path, the jar file of GssResource, and the 2 dependencies, the closure stylesheet.jar, and you need also Guava because closure stylesheet is depending on Guava. Yeah, please refer to the installation guide on GitHub because you will find there the correct link to download the libraries. How to use it? It's really straightforward for a good developer to use GssResource because it's the same that with CSSResource. So quickly, you define a GSS file with your rule, your CSS rule, and all the features supported by GssResource. Then you define an interface extending the GssResource interface. This interface will contain the method to access your style class name at runtime, because your class name will be obfuscated after compilation. Then you define a method in client bundle interface that will give you an instance of your GssResource. So it's exactly the same that for CSSResource. And could we use GssResource with UI Binder? The answer is yes, because GssResource extends CSSResource, so you can use it in UI Binder, but you have to specify the type in the UI style tag. If you specify the type, the correct generator will be triggered when. But most of the time it works, but sometimes it doesn't work. And I will explain. I will explain the problem right now. What is the problem? As I said two slides before, to use CSSResource or GssResource, you have to create an interface that will contain the method to access the style class at runtime, and you need also a client bundle. When you define a UI style element in your UI Binder, it's the generator of UI Binder that will create for you this boilerplate code. Then the compiler will detect this new interface and compile them by using the appropriate generator. So in our case, we will use the GssResource generator. So where is the problem here? The problem comes when the UI Binder generator try to generate the resource, the GssResource interface. Because to generate this interface, the UI Binder generator need to know all the style class that are defined in the content of the UI style element. And to do that, you need to parse first the CSS, the CSS, and so you use the old parser of CSSResource. And so finally, we pass 2 times the CSS, 1 time to generate the interface by using the CSSResource parser, and a second time with the GssResource generator that will use the new parser. And so we can have a conflict here. I said that most of the time it works, and indeed most of the time we will just see several warnings during the compilation, because hopefully the CSSResource parser ignores the rule that it doesn't understand. So, and in our case, it's not really a problem, because what we need is to get a list of the style class defined on the CSS. But you can get a compilation error if you use something that the old parser doesn't understand. And for example, if you are using the Unchild pseudo selector, the Unchild pseudo selector is not supported by CSSResource. In fact, if you try to parse that with the old parser, it will fail, because it doesn't expect to find a parenthesis or bracket in the selector definition. So, and the workaround in CSSResource was simply to escape the parenthesis by using a backslash. But if you do that, it's the GssResource parser that doesn't expect to find a backslash in the CSS. So we are stuck with that, and the only workaround for this case is to use an external GssResource to import it in your UI Binder template. Now, clearly this bug occurs because the UI Binder doesn't know anything about GssResource, and when we will include GssResource in the grid core, this bug will be easy to fix. So I will try to quickly list and give you an example of each feature of GssResource that will give you an overview of what is possible to do with GssResource. The first feature is the abilities to define constant in your CSS. It's the same that with CSS resource. You have to use the def at rule. Then you define the name of the constant and then the value. You have to note here that with GSS resource, the name of the constant must be defined in uppercase and not in lowercase, otherwise the parser will fail. And also we can define the value of a variable in terms of other variables, of other constants. Sorry. Another feature is the function. GSS gives you a list of several functions that you can use directly in your CSS. We have, for the time being, two kinds of function. An arithmetic function, so you can add or subtract or multiply or divide or calculate the min or the max between the different value. And we have also the color manipulation function. I think the name of the function is speaking by themselves. So, and this function takes a variable number of arguments. So, for example, with the add function, you can add as many number as you want. But for the divide method will only take 2 parameters. It's important to mention that the implementation of these functions are done in Java. So you can define your own function too. You just have to define a class that implements a specific interface, GSS function, and you receive the parameter in argument, and then you return your result. This is an example of GSS code using function. So, for example, here to calculate the margin left of the content, we add 2 times the padding of the left navigation plus the width of the left navigation. The next feature is for me the most important, because it allows you to respect the don't repeat yourself principle. So it's the mixin. A mixin can be considered as a macro, in fact, something that you want to repeat in different places in your code. For defining a mixin, you have to use the def mixin at rule, and then the name of the mixin and the parameter that the mixin takes. Then, when you want to use a mixin, use the mixin at rule and the name of the mixin. And so you can use the mixin everywhere instead of the declaration. And I think that mixin is very useful when you want to use a CSS property that need to be prefixed by the vendor prefix of each browser. Let me give you an example. This is a mixin that helps you to specify the different radius of different corners of an element. But if you want to do that in CSS, you need a 12 declaration if you want to support all the browser. No, you just have to call the mixin border radius and to give the different radius that you want to give on each different corner, it's work. And we give you an example of mixin file. Now, at ArcBees, we have some CSS experts, and they already define a file containing some useful mixin that we reuse in all of our projects. And this file is open source and present on GitHub, so you can reuse it if you want. Let me just show you that. So for example, you have the border radius that I just showed you before. So we have all our mixin that we reuse in our project. So for example, interesting is the flip horizontal or flip vertical that allow you to flip an element horizontally or vertically. I think that's, if you want to understand your CSS, you understand the CSS better if you see flip horizontal, that's if you see WebKit transforms scale x -1. So it makes your CSS more readable if you use the mixin instead of the H declaration, the rotation and so on. So the file is on GitHub if you want to use it. Don't hesitate.
So the prefix is going to the appropriate permutation or not?
No.
But you can annotate it with the permutation annotation or not?
What do you mean?
Yeah, in CSS resources we can annotate a fragment of CSS with a permutation, right?
Ah, with the conditional CSS,
Yeah.
I mean, I will talk about that just right now, I think. It's a conditional CSS. So, oops. Sorry.
So you can nest conditionals inside of mixing.
Oh yeah, we can. So the conditional CSS. So let's just remember how it's work in CSS resource. So you have to use the if, elif, and else at rules. You specify the name of the default binding property, the permutation that you want to test, and you give a space separated list of values. Now for GSS resource, we do that differently. If you want to test on default binding property, you have to use the is function. So if we reach the ifs here, we are testing if the user is Internet Explorer 8 or Internet Explorer 9, and it's not local, it's not English. You can do that. Else if it's Safari, you do that. Else you do that. Please note that now you can use the or and operator. It was not possible before in the CSS resource. And let's quickly check the is API function. In fact, the function takes two parameters. The first one is optional, is the name of the default binding property. If you don't specify the name, we will assume that we want to test on the user agent. And the second the second parameter is the value of the different binding property that we want to match. And you can also use the conditional to initialize your constant, like before. Another feature is the alternate at rule. In fact, with GSS, if in the same rule set you define several times the same CSS property, the compilation will fail with this error message. The idea behind this is to force you to check if the multiple declaration is not an error, if it's intentional. And in our case, it's intentional because the first declaration, if we go back, the first declaration is the fallback property if the browser doesn't support the HGBE method. So you have to put the alternate annotation. So it's at rule that you put into comment. And so tell to the compiler, okay, it's what I want. I want that you keep these two declarations. The RTL flipping, identically to CSS resource, GSS resource has support for generating left-to-right as well as right-to-left style sheet. That means that GSS resource will generate two different CSS, and depending on the locale of the user, it will use the right style sheet. By default, RTL is assumed to be the default direction. And when GSS resource will produce the left-to-right CSS, in this example, the margin left will become margin right, the border right become border left, and it flip the padding right and the padding left. Now, maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you don't want that the compiler do that for you. So if you don't want that GSS resource change a specific declaration, you have to use the special no flip annotation in front of this declaration.
Have you guys at ArcBees ever done any of the RTL flipping?
No, not yet.
Just curious how it works.
I tested it. It works fine.
Yeah, sure.
But you don't have the.
Yeah.
5 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. Yet. Good. Nice.
The runtime evaluation is the evaluation of static method or field of a class when we inject the CSS into the DOM. It's done at the runtime. For doing that, you don't have to use an at rule anymore. So in CSS resource, you had to use the eval at rule. Now it's become a function. So it's the eval function, and you can use this eval function everywhere you want in the code because it's a function. For the sprite or sprite? Sprite. For the sprite, you don't need to use an at rule also to define a sprite in GssResource. You just have to use the special grid sprite properties. And as before, these properties will be replaced by the properties needed for building the sprite. Yeah, the resource URL is the equivalent of the URL at rule in GssResource. The same with eval is now became a function, so we can reuse this function everywhere. But the goal of this feature is just to get access to the URL of your resources included in your client bundle. So, for example, here I get the URL of a font, and then I get the URL of an image. And the last feature is the external at rule. The external at rule can be used in GssResource to suppress selector obfuscation while still allowing programmatic access to the selector name. This is the same that in GssResource, but you have two constraints. You cannot use dot in front of your class, something that was allowed by GssResource. And if you want to use the star suffix, in fact, the star suffix tells to the generator that all class starting with the string are to be considered as external. If you want to use that, you have to surround the expression with quotes. Otherwise, the parser will fail. Next, we will talk about how to migrate your code to GssResource if you are interested to use it. I wrote the next two slides a few days ago before to talk with Godkut and Daniel about how we will include GssResource into Grid. So the migration path that I'm going to show you is valid if you want to use, if you want to test GssResource as an external library. I mean, if you want to use GssResource right now. When GssResource will be included into Grid, the migration will be slightly different. But I will talk to that later. So the first thing you have to do is to change each resource interface and make them extend GssResource instead of CSSResource. In fact, it's the only point that will change in the future. The future we will just keep one interface. It will be CSSResource. So. Then, as you saw in my previous slide, the CSS file used by GssResource is not compatible with GssResource. We have the same feature, but the implementation is a bit different. So that means that you will need to convert each of your CSS files. Hopefully, you will not have to do that manually because I've written a converter that will take in input a CSS file compatible with GssResource and produce in output a CSS file compatible with GssResource. It's a simple Java class named CSS to GSS. So you can use it to create maybe a program in Java in order to convert all your CSS files if you have a lot of CSS files. But the Java class defines also a main method, so you can use it directly in a bash script if you want, or if you want to convert your field one by one. So, for example, this is the command line to run in order to convert one file. It's pretty simple, but I wanted to do something simpler for the Grid developer. So I just create a web application that will convert your CSS file. I will show you. Oh, shit, I need give me 2 minutes.
Oh, you need.
Yeah, I will send you by email.
Just can you also send me an IM.
So this is a CSS file. Maybe CSS file I take in Sencha in GXT. So you just passed your CSS into the left text area, and you just have to press the convert button, and then you receive the result of the conversion. So you just have to copy paste that in your application. And
so I just ran a different one, and I got a bunch of skipping at the bottom. Are you getting that here as well?
Yeah, it's the log from the server.
Okay.
But the conversion works fine.
Okay. And just to confirm, the value function is gone, and you just say method name dot method name dot method name now, and that's totally legal.
Sorry?
I've got a bunch of defs that were converted from def name of variable value quote function chain that is now just def name of variable function chain.
So if we look there, we have an example. Oops.
It's not a proper eval. It's not an eval like the eval rule is. It's a def rule.
Yeah, it's a def rule, and you have to use the eval function.
Maybe we.
Yeah,
we'll do that. Great. Sorry.
So it's very.
I'm excited.
Yeah, I think this is pretty awesome because
it's very simple for you. If you have one or two CSS files to convert, you don't have to set up a class path and run the converter by yourself. You just go. It's the application deploying Google App Engine, so you can go and just pass your code and you receive the result.
Want to give a script that crawls the directory and finds CSS files and replaces them with GSS instead of changing one at a time.
Yeah, I will talk about that later. Okay. Yeah, that's the roadmap I want to talk now. We discussed yesterday with Godkut and Daniel about how to integrate GSS resource into grids. This is the result of this discussion. In fact, we want to introduce GSS resource in grid 2.7. GSS resource is stable. I mean, if it works with all internal application at Google. And we will use the GSS resource generator by default. And we will keep only one interface. The interface will be CSS resource. But when we will generate the file, we'll use the GSS resource generator. That means that you can keep all the CSS resource interface, but you need to migrate all your CSS file of your application. But to avoid to force you to migrate directly to GSS resource for grid 2.7, there will be a flag that will enable an automatic conversion of your CSS file to GSS. So that means that when the GSS resource generator will try to compile a CSS file, I mean a file with the extension .css. If you have a file .gss, it's a GSS file, so it works fine. It will try first to compile it, and if it's not able to parse the file, and the flag is set to true, it will use the converter to convert on the fly the CSS file to GSS, and after that, it will try to compile to parse it again. By default, the flag will be turned to off because it's really we want to make understand to people that okay, we can convert we can allow this automatic conversion in grid 2.7, but in grid 3.0, this conversion, this automatic conversion will be removed.
So this conversion will, so it will happen automatically. It will be behind the scenes, or will you actually know
behind the scene?
It's like running the tool in memory. It's like on the fly, it will run the tool and make the conversion for you.
So first, let's say you have still CSS in your project and you issue the first compile. It will just fail and tell you, well, you have CSS here, grid changed. There's two ways now. You can convert your file using one of the tools that Julien presented, or you can enable this flag and we will do this in memory for you. But be aware of that we're going to remove this feature of automatic conversion with the next version of Grid. So you now have some time to migrate, but you need to do something.
So the idea is we are trying to provide a way for applications if they need to be able to switch one CSS source at a time. So using this flag, instead of making a giant conversion from CSS to GSS, they can switch one at a time if they like. So
it's not a one-time thing, right? So if I have an app that's always doing every time I run the git compiler, it does the conversion for me.
Yes.
Yeah.
As opposed to doing it once and checking the file and.
Yes. But maybe we can add a flag that will just also create the file on the disk.
No, we should not optimize for this path because we want people off this path. They should pay the price if they choose to.
There's some complications of generating the files,
Because
but the other thing is actually I think we discussed we're gonna use the extension to decide if it's CSS or GSS instead of trying to parse. So if the file name is CSS, we will give an error by default asking for conversion. If they specify as a shortcut for now, in order to coincidentally is not to make a breaking change, we will make the conversion automatic. And if it's a GSS file, then that's fine. But it's to prove that we decided that we're gonna select some candidate projects in Google Tree inside Google and make sure it is working for them. Then probably if it works for them, it's gonna be like.
So you should also have an option to, when it does the automatic conversion, to also spit out the GSS file, right? So in case somebody wants to just switch, then
that might. We can't talk about it, but that might have some complications in different build systems. You're gonna read the file from a jar file, and
you don't know where it's supposed to go. And I think if we have these tools in place, if we have an App Engine application, if you have a tool that you can run on the command line, it's fairly easy to do. And you want to be reviewing what it actually outputs. You don't just want to go blindly and use it. Maybe there's even some stuff you want to do restructuring it.
We can have a simple tool that's just traverses the directory and finds all CSS and converts to GSS. You can
standalone.
Standalone. They can run and we can split out everything instead of trying to do it from compilation.
Yes. That's another option.
Yes.
Okay. We will probably provide that. It's just like a small script around it.
Okay.
So, but the idea is we don't want to support the old CSS style for long.
The main point of this was how can we delete the technical debt in GssResource really early on. Okay. And it's not like we're offering people something really better, so there's an incentive to switch.
And then, so the old CSS, if it fails, then people have to go in and modify. If you cannot automatically convert it, then
yes.
So far, think more optimistic. Like we don't want this to work. We're gonna probably fix any problems with the tool to make this conversion work out of the bugs. If really we go out of options and there are unsolvable problems, we were talking about providing another flag that instead of running the conversion, we can use the old version. But that's like a lot of additional work we are trying to avoid. I mean, that's going to be more complex to handle.
Yeah, I think in the future we can maybe bring some improvement in GSS directory. For example, ArcBees, I already mentioned that we have several front-end engineer or web integrator that like very much CSS. They are CSS experts, and they are used to use CSS extension like SAS or less. I think that they have really appreciate to switch from CSS resource to GSS resource. For them, is really nice. But for example, one big missing feature in GSS is the nested selector. So that gives you a better structure to your CSS file, and so it's really nice to add this kind of feature in GSS in the future. So that's a nested tool. So you define here, for example, you define the class container, and then you say, okay, all the spam or the div inside the container will use font size 2em, and all the anchor tag inside a span or div inside a container will use font weight bold. In fact, it's compiled to that in QSS. It could be nice maybe to. No, you disagree?
I strongly disagree. That's a great way to slow mobile devices down.
Yeah.
Because people do silly things and forget that if they nest deeper than 2 or 3, that they're murdering their mobile devices.
Also from the other side, because of the potential issues, GSS usually goes in the direction of command lines, right? Instead of introducing a new syntax. So this is like a different syntax that might be good for to push for it to the GSS team to accept the new syntax. It's mostly if you get GSS, it's CSS compliant. But we can, if you decide to move in that direction, we can talk.
But I think I'm done with my presentation, so if you have questions, also.
Awesome, it gets better every time I see it.
Yeah, no, this is great.
And I think specifically, I think we have an awesome plan to actually make this a default and kill some code of the SDK and make the SDK better.